expectations without truth are really dangerous.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. When I was a kid, a family friend of ours had a winery, and it was not yet a real for reals selling to the public winery. This is still when he was just doing it on his own as a hobby. And my sister and I used to help pick the grapes quite often. And we would spend all day in the blazing sun picking grapes, and he would buy us hot dogs, and we just thought it was the best thing in the world. So child labor at its best. But he also had blueberries and peaches and all this kind of stuff. So one day we were there and it was peach season, and he picks off this peach that I would tell you, now granted, I was 8 or 9 years old, but at the age of 8 or 9, it was almost as wide as my face. So, my face is bigger now, so it's not that big, but it was a big peach. And I had never had fresh peaches. I had only had canned peaches, which I loved canned peaches. I mean, who doesn't? They're dripping in sugar, but I'd never had a fresh peach. And I bit into this peach, and it was perfect. And there was just I just remember juice pouring down my face onto my shirt. And because I was little and it was such a big peach, it was all over my face. And it tasted just heavily, better than canned peaches. Everything about it was perfect. And here's the funny thing. Have you ever had a fresh peach, Elliot? Have you ever had a fresh peach that didn't taste like white cardboard and crunch when you ate it?
I don't think so. I've had fresh apples from the orchard, but
sure.
I don't think I've had a fresh peach. No.
I'm sure you've had not canned peaches.
No, not canned peaches, but not pick off the tree that I eat.
So that's not the point. I get so I'm ruining the punchline to my own story here. I thought that's what peaches were like. So I go careening into the rest of my adulthood. I'm ooh, I love peaches. I'll get some at the grocery store. You buy them, you take them home. They are reliably a disappointment, 99.9% of the time. The strawberries are kind of the same way, right? A great portion of the time, they are white in the center. They don't have a ton of flavor. It's hard. Now in the day of farmers markets and whatnot, you can get more ripe, better for real peaches. But for the majority of my adult life, it put my ruler, my scale of what peaches should be at a very irrational point. And I was reminded of this a couple months ago, or this is before the pandemic, because a friend of mine, it was her birthday, and we went to a local restaurant here, and it was the first time I ever had burrata. Have you had burrata?
No, what is burrata?
It's like a mozzarella cheese, but the outside.
Oh, yes.
It's the harder, but inside it's creamier, and I had this burrata at a very small little boutique restaurant called Orto, and it was otherworldly delicious, the best thing ever. And so ever since then, every time I'm someplace, I'm ooh, they have burrata. I get it. And it's wah, wah, wah. And so it has brought up this whole, not that I'm against having amazing first experiences, but I just think that it's interesting to think about expectations and then unmet expectations. And, now this episode will be posting after election day has happened. And I suspect that we're going to be in the thick of still probably not knowing. It'll be about a week after election day. So who knows if we will have an answer by now. But I think I've been thinking a lot about expectations and how you manage them so that you don't go through life feeling disappointed all the time.
Well, I will tell you one of the best examples, and I've mentioned this before, I believe, one of the best examples in my life of managing expectations was, Nikki and I eloped to Hawaii. And so we got married on the island of Kauai. And on our wedding night, Nikki said to me, as she changed, she said to me, pointing to herself, she goes, "Hey, I'm just telling you, this is the best it's ever going to be." And it was the funniest thing. I just dissolved in laughter. And she
That
was
is
just
amazing.
one of the many reasons I love her. But anyway,
I love
I
Nikki.
think about that because
This
you think,
is as good as it's going to get.
it's as good as it's going to get. If you want a master class in managing expectations, that one, that 1 second
Enjoy it while
mark.
it's here.
Yeah. But I do think that the two go together, meaning is it, if you have the best first experience ever, and then managing those expectations, those two things have to go together. And I think of that often with bringing somebody on, even like a rock star recruit, or bring somebody into your organization. Because during the courting phase, or they just get on, and even if you do it right, the onboarding phase, you want to highlight all the great things about your company, of course. And there comes a time when they settle into routine, when they have to do their work, and they, some days are better than others, et cetera. And even if they're satisfied, which is a dangerous word, satisfied, if they're satisfied with their job, 1 month can turn into 2, and 2 years can turn into 4. And I find that I have to give conscious thought to, how can I create an experience now for people who have been with me for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, to even come close to making them as excited now for their job as they were to join the firm, as sure about that decision, as happy with that decision. And it's difficult to rise to that level.
It is. And I really wanted to talk about expectations, but now my brain has jumped off on a whole other, not unrelated thread, but the interesting concept of satisfaction. Because there is something there. I think we all think we want to be satisfied. My daughter's been on a Hamilton kick. So that song, like, I will never be satisfied. Then may you always be satisfied. Like, I don't know that we want satisfaction. Like we do momentarily, but then without expectation, or like hunger. Like expectation is kind of expectation and desire and hunger sort of go in the same, like having an itch you want to scratch. Not always. Expectation doesn't have to be for more or new, but the expectation, the way you were just talking about it, was like meeting a need. And once a need is met, there's that fine line of doing over. Like if every peach I ever had was like that first one, I don't know that I would always appreciate how good the first one was. Or when I do get a good one, I'm like, oh my God, this one's really good.
Well, but I think that, satisfaction, the way I was thinking about it, was fine. It was fine. Everything's fine.
Well, it has two words. I mean, there's two uses of You're like, wow, that was really satisfying, like nourishing. And in that way, people use it very positively. But then once you are satisfied, like that quickly dribbles over into sort of complacency and fineness and inertia, I think. I mean, well, maybe I'm projecting.
No, I do. I think, and I've often told people, that's why, fine is something you pay and not something you get. If it's just fine, it's fine. But I agree. If every single peach met that same standard,
it would just be a peach.
It would just be a peach. It reminds me of that line in The Incredibles when Dash, the son, was saying to his mother, that why can't we just be special? Why can't we use our abilities? And she said, everyone's special, Dash. And he said, that means no one is. And that was very true. If everything is special, that means that nothing is. Right. But I do think that we tend to, mark our time, mark our views based on just individual blips, individual experiences, individual occasions. That's one of the reasons, I know I'm going all over the place, but one of the reasons why in quarantine, time both seems to drag and fly, because there seems to be nothing that really changes one day to the next. Whereas you often mark your time at, we went to that birthday party and that wedding and that vacation and that thing that we did. And the sameness just causes your life to blur.
Right.
And
We've talked about that in terms of almost like punctuation marks
yes,
in life, like the ... the commas, the periods, the paragraph, new paragraph, hard break. And I think that, with that blur. And so this is really interesting, like these moments of like those peach or burrata moments where it feels like there are little blips on the radar of
yeah.
greatness. And so, but it's so interesting because where I thought we were going to go with this. And so it's fun to sort of feel my whole brain twist around in mid episode is, the dangers and trickiness of like unmet expectations, which are absolutely it can be a huge issue between people, whether just in relationships or in companies or whatever. And I do not think the answer, which I hear people often say, is, well, just keep your expectations really low and that way you'll never be disappointed. I'm like, wow, that sounds like a terrible existence.
I don't know. That's really the only way I got Nikki to marry me. But other than that, I think you're right. From the business context, you're right.
Well, I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, I get a lot of juice out of having things to look forward to or finding ways to mark moments to make them feel interesting and special and enjoy them. So that to me feels like that to me is not worth the value of avoiding disappointment, of like giving up the being excited about a thing, because that's half the fun of it for me. Now, that being said, I have often said disappointment is my Achilles heel. Like I'm a toddler about like when I thought something. If you recall, when my New York vacation house got canceled, I
do recall that.
A petulant toddler about it. I was like, fine, I just won't go on vacation, as if I was really, that'll teach the world. I'll show them. I can be really, really immature when it comes to disappointment. And yet, but maybe that's partly because I do so enjoy looking forward to things. But in the context of like setting expectations with other people, I think that's where, because everything we're talking about so far is like my own expectation and then my own disappointment. But when you were saying like when somebody's coming in, how do you set the expectation for the reality of things? And I think some of it comes back to not romanticizing, to actually talking about the realities of, this part's great and this part's great. This part gets super boring, but that's just the way it is. And making sure people really, I guess that's the big question. Where is it valuable to tamp down expectations? Where is it valuable to build them up? And the role of communication in making sure that they don't just get dropped. I think that's where the real danger is. If you expect you're getting like dun da dum, and then it's like, and that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think there are two things. One is making sure that there's a reason to set expectations and then meeting them. The other is, I think, in serving people who may not give voice to their expectations, but who may still find themselves in 5 years or 6 years, whatever it is, wanting to leave your organization because they're just bored, not because they're dissatisfied necessarily, but they're just bored. And I think that if you anticipate the natural need for human beings to experience blips, some punctuation, and have the conversations, not how are you doing or do you like what you're doing, et cetera, and not just planning another great Christmas party in a time when we can actually have holiday parties, but asking the question, instead of do you want anything to change, to how will next year change? How should next year change? In any respect. And it doesn't matter whether it's, well, I want to learn Java programming, or I'd like to get some experience in underwriting, or whatever it happens to be. But what changes are we going to see next year? How are you going to do that? And typically in those conversations, what changes are you going to make next year sounds punitive. Like, how are you going to raise your performance above this standard? But I don't mean it that way. I mean, just to make sure that in your work life, there are blips, there are punctuations, there are peaches and burrata, experiences, so that you can look back on your time as having not just accomplished something, but having enjoyed something.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting because I think so much of this comes back to just a constant communication. Like I think a lot of times problems with expectations come when they haven't been discussed. And there's been a bunch of assumptions, or people just like, well, I got the impression that this is how that was going to play out. And that was never the other person's issue, or never their vision. I mean, I remember, especially when my kids were younger, they would say, well, you said this was going to happen. I was like, no, I said maybe. Like, those are very different things. And interesting, I think we even talked about this on an episode a long, long, long time ago, but Turner one time said to me, we were having a bit of a fight about something, and he had wanted to do something. And I remember the conversation, and I remember saying maybe. And at the time I remember thinking, oh my God, there's just no way I can make that work. But I hated to shut it down, because I thought, well, maybe I could rearrange a thing, and possibly he could go see his friend for that. Well, when it came down to it not working, he said, you promised. And I was like, oh no, I know I didn't promise. I may have said maybe, and that may have been misleading, but I know I didn't promise. And out of frustration, I said, okay, Turner, so if I'm not 100% sure something has worked, would you rather me just say no? And he goes, yes. Yes, I would rather you just say no. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a lot easier than me holding it in this maybe bin and trying to make it work. Like, if it's hard, I'll just say no. And so that's how we did it from that point forward. And that was like an expectation alignment. It never occurred to me that he would rather me say no and shut down the possibility of it than say maybe. He doesn't like maybe.
Yeah, no, and I think that expectation alignment makes sense. And one of the things that I was thinking of when you were talking was this issue of like team retreats or corporate retreats. Because very often a team retreat or a corporate retreat can be, well, first of all, it's a different experience from the day-to-day. It can be fun. It can be interesting. It can be more stimulating than just sitting at your desk or your cubicle or dealing with the same concerns. So there's that, just the experiential part of it. And then there's the expectation part. The expectation part could be, and because we had this team retreat, we're going to come out of it with a whole different corporate direction, or things are going to change in my day-to-day because we're going to make huge changes in the company. And so for something like that, I think if you went into a team retreat, kind of shutting down that we may not change anything in the company. We'll see what happens, but we may not change anything. But we want to do the retreat just to enjoy the retreat, just to experience the retreat and see if something comes out of it. I think you may still have that Peach or Barada moment with the retreat itself. And it could be a reason or basis for rejuvenation of your team. But so often I see these exercises or these events get lost. The experience or the value of the experience get lost because the expectation is that the experience is just a means to the end of accomplishing X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I have that fight with. It was so not have that fight with, but it's a hard concept sometimes, because getting like the leadership of an organization together is a big deal. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of high value time, and I totally understand and respect the need and want to make the best use of that time. Where my road diverges a bit in the wood is what that means of making the best use, because that time for those people to just even connect in more casual conversations, whether they're even business casual or just knowing each other better, like that can sometimes have enormous potential. And I'm not saying take 4 days and just sit on a boat and, party and do nothing. Like there does absolutely have to be some structure. But when someone wants to cram every lunch, every dinner, just from beginning to end, as if that is the only place there is value, I think you're really, really missing. The expectation there is a little misaligned. I want to touch on something that you said a few minutes ago that made me think of something. And that is, I think sometimes where expectation goes a little awry is where it is confused with certainty. Like that my expectation was this, and because that didn't happen, now I am let down. And I was reminded I can't remember what it was you said, but something you said reminded me of a friend of mine from a number of years ago who was going through a very challenging relationship experience. And the other person, the partner of my friend, was saying, like, I need to like set my expectations, because kind of saying like, are we going to be together forever? And my friend was like, I can't promise that because I don't know. Like, but that doesn't mean set your expectation at this is going to be over soon. What I can tell you is your expectation is that I am choosing you today and I'm going to choose you tomorrow, like for the foreseeable future. Like that is my come from. And it's this, maybe not the best story to make the point I'm trying to make, but is this distinction between the danger of expectations that go really, really far into the future, I think are challenging, versus the expectation of what you expect from someone or a situation in any given moment. And I think that's why the communication is so important and the alignment, because it's a constant conversation of what is the current expectation versus trying to set an expectation that goes out months or years is, I think, where you can look out that far, but with less certainty to it, I guess, maybe. I don't know. Is this making any sense?
Well, it is interesting, the setting of expectations, because it reminds me of a conversation that I just had with Allie, who from her help on the podcast, et cetera. And Allie has been working for me as an independent contractor. She started as an intern and she stayed, for which I'm enormously grateful. But she's been an independent contractor. And because really building brand for a law firm at that point wasn't what she wanted to do. She wanted to go experience other things in her field, and that was fine. And so she stayed working for me until she found what she wanted to do. But because of a lot of different initiatives we have, she has come on board, and we were talking about her coming on board as a W-2 employee.
Oh.
Yeah. So something that I'm really tremendously happy about, but I wanted to make sure that she wasn't doing it because she knew that I wanted her to do that. She was doing it because that's where she was. But I found it interesting when I was talking to her, because the phrase that I use is, when I think of somebody as W-2, okay, so you're going to be a permanent employee. But I was pulling back because
as a lawyer, that is very funny that you would toss in a word like permanent.
Right, permanent. Have
you talked to your lawyer about that?
Yeah, so that we had this whole thing going. Well, when I say permanent, I mean W-2 employee. It's not like you can never leave, because of course you can leave, because there is no such thing as indentured servitude. And I'm going all over.
But if there was,
but there is. It was interesting. We didn't have to have this whole conversation, but there may be, when you're talking to somebody at the very beginning of their career, and they're signing up with your company, somebody like me who runs the company, my view of what that commitment could be, hey, I'm going to be here forever and I'll get my gold watch at 25 years or whatever the stereotype is. And their commitment, which is much like your friend, hey, I can't promise way out. All I can say is I really want to do this right now and tomorrow and probably for the foreseeable future.
And the crazy thing is, my friend was in no way saying, I'm keeping my options open, I'll let you know how it goes. Was like, I am all in. Like I am 100% in, and I anticipate being 100% in every day. I can see forward to the future. But to me, it feels a tiny bit like the first time my kids expressed a fear of my husband or I dying. And I could not in good conscience look them in the eye and say, oh, we'll never die, while you're, like, I don't know. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. And it felt, but at the same time, I didn't want to be like, well, everyone's dying, son. Like we're all dying. Yeah, I know.
We're not guaranteed anything.
And it was that fine line of, because expectations without truth are really dangerous, I think. I think that's where if you are expectations that are set that are not tethered back to really honest truth are incredibly dangerous. And so I didn't want to say, oh, we'll never die. But I could say there's absolutely no reason to imagine that one of us is going to pass away anytime in as far out as you can imagine. There's no reason to fear that at the moment that I know of. So to me, it feels that same kind of thing, because that's where I think healthy expectations, I think, come back to committing to what is committable. Is that a word? Committable? I don't know that that's a word. I think I made it up. I know you know what I mean, so it'll work for the moment. But
it conveys meaning, so it should be a word.
Committable? I think it's a word. it's expectation is committing to what is committable, but not further than that. Or maybe if it is, it's more loose at that point. Maybe I think that's why I guess it always comes back to communication. That if you can't to be able to communicate what's changing and what's shifting, and to say, I love what you said about the ability to say to your boss, I'm kind of bored. I'd like to try something new. That's scary, because if you don't have an exacting idea of what that looks like, you risk them thinking, oh, they're checked out. Let's get rid of them and hire somebody new. There's all sorts of fears around that. But wow, to be able to have those conversations to keep expectations and needs and wants in alignment so that you can continue traveling together, I think is if someone had just said to me, this will be the best peach you ever, it's all downhill from here, like Nikki did, I'm going to hand you this peach. This is the best peach you'll ever have. All other peaches will be a disappointment from this point forward. Maybe that would work.
Well, yeah, but
that's not quite what she would. I'm sorry. That is not what Nikki was saying.
That is not what Nikki was
saying. The beginning part of
right?
that metaphor started to work. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is.
Then you got into trouble. But I do think that the real power lay in what you said, which is that the real danger lies in expectations without truth.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group, as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email, and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.